So, hello, and welcome back to Ashley Makes. And today we are talking about some ways you can save money with your sewing. So, the state of the world being what it is, I think the majority of us are trying to keep our money close to the vest, shall we say. Things have gotten crazy expensive. I know for us, groceries are wild right now and other things like that. But, you know, we persevere. And so, you know, I wanted to talk about this because I think a lot of people are thinking about this lately. And while I don't think you should feel bad about spending money on your hobbies, because I think it's really important in keeping your mental health in check and keeping yourself happy and doing the things you enjoy. And also, of course, investing in your skills, because God knows we might need to know how to sew here in a little while. So I think it's never bad to invest in learning a new skill. It is, you know, we got to talk about it. We got to talk about saving a little bit of money. I know here in Canada, the exchange has been insane. So say for instance, where a cashmere pattern in the US would have previously cost me about $18. Here in Canada with exchange right now, it's costing me $30. So while I might have thought about it like less as being a sub $20 purchase, somehow being $30, it does give me a bit more pause when you add printing and mock-ups and everything else on top of that. So I'm really thinking a little bit harder about my projects, the way I'm spending my money, my fabric, all that kind of stuff. Like I say, this video is not to make you feel bad about spending money on yourself or on your hobby, because I think, especially as women, I see a lot of things online where they're like, you know, oh, my husband's chastising me about spending money on my hobbies and all that. And I think a lot of times women spend money on other people. So, you know, it's important to do things you love. Obviously, I don't need this much fabric either, so that's fully to be said. I could probably go a while without buying some new fabric. And also, I wanted to say too that the majority of sewing companies that I know of are small businesses. They're small women-led businesses, so by spending money with them, that's like probably the most economy stimulating spending that you could do, because it's actually going into the hands of people and their families. So, you know, places like literally almost any of the pattern companies other than the big four is probably a good place to spend your money. Same with, you know, small fabric vendors, local fabric vendors. Beehive Craft Studio in Austin was my local in Austin. Here it is Rick Rack Textiles in Calgary. They're fantastic. You know, people like Stephanie Canada, who's selling secondhand fabric. Those are also good options. So, you know, if you're going to spend your money, think about how you're spending it. I will say that, you know, stimulate the economy with what little money we have and put it into the pockets where it actually can do some good. But this is a really long-winded way to say I'm going to tell you some ways to save what little money we have after buying groceries and still enjoy sewing. All right, so let's just jump right into the tips. So my first things first is to really avoid impulse buying patterns. Now, I know this is really hard in general with shopping, but this is something actually that I really struggled with, especially early on in my sewing, just because, well, I mean, especially at that time, because there wasn't the amount of plus size patterns available. So when I saw something, I really felt like I had to jump on it and I had to get that pattern. Now it's, you know, it's been a bit, but you know, it's still, I don't know what it is about sewing patterns. It gets me a little bit more than other things. I think when you see like $5 patterns or 20% off or that sort of thing, it really gets you to impulse buy them, and then they just stay in your Google Drive or on your hard drive or whatever in perpetuity, and then I think you don't think about it again. So, you know, it's something just to think about. One of the ways that I like to tackle this is I actually have a Pinterest board. I have a sewing Pinterest board, and under that I have a section called Pattern Wishlist. And so every time a new pattern comes out that I'm really interested in, either I'll get like an email or I'll see it on Instagram or something like that, I will go ahead and just put it on my Pinterest board. And then if I'm still thinking about it, if I'm still thinking about it later when I want to go to make it, I will then, at that time when I want to make the thing, go ahead and purchase the pattern and go ahead and get it printed. Now I know you're going to say, Ashley, then you were paying full price for the pattern. But I will tell you that the cheapest pattern is the pattern you didn't buy. So a lot of times when you get, you know, say a year from now, when you get to making that project, you know, maybe a new pattern came out that fits your idea better. There's, you know, a pattern from another company that you like better comes out. You know, my last video where I talked about my Make 9, that's a fine example of I had bought a pattern and then I made one from that same pattern company and I decided I hated it. And then I bought another pattern from a company I did like. So this is just one of those things to really think about is, do I need that pattern? Can I wait on that pattern? I think the other thing is too, with the demise of fabric.com, you know, Joann's now, all that kind of stuff where it's harder to get staple fabrics over and over again. Some of these more specific patterns that have specific material requirements, I often wait until I can get those specific materials before I buy the pattern, because who knows when I am going to be able to find and afford the materials that would work for that project that'll fit what I want to do. So that is tip number 1. So the next concept, sort of in the same vein, is to really evaluate the way you're getting your patterns printed. Now, if you work with Big Four primarily, you probably won't have as much of this issue, but I would really highly recommend you look at the indie makers, especially if you're plus size, because they're really knocking it out of the park. But anyway, all that being said, there's a bunch of ways to tackle this problem. Initially, back in the day, I had determined that actually printing at home was costing me more money than it would to get something printed. So with the cost of the ink and the cartridges and how often I did it, it was really killing me that way. And especially with exchange now on how much ink cartridges are here, it's a bit wild. So it's actually quite expensive. So I would encourage you, if you're not really thinking about it and you're still just running everything off your home printer, to really look at like what your percentage is that you're printing just in patterns and how much that ink and everything is costing you. One of the things that I used to do as well, after we determined that, was I used to order from pdfplotting.com in the States, and it's really an inexpensive way to print. Again, because I was sending it off in a batch because they have flat rate shipping. I was really printing more than I needed and more patterns than I would get to. So if you're sensing a theme here, the cheapest pattern, the cheapest way to print is the pattern you don't need, right? Like, I'm not even saying that correctly. The cheapest printing is the pattern that you don't print, right? So kind of sensing the theme of where we're going with this. So I found myself doing that a lot. You know, I would get those patterns on sale and then I would send them all to be printed, which was more than I could actually sew. I still even have ones in this pile that I still haven't sewn for PDF plotting. So that was it. So after that, we decided that wasn't a good idea. And then I moved to ordering from the Plotted Pattern Company in the States. I do really like these guys, and I probably would still be using them if I was still living in the US. The shipping to Canada is sort of nuts, but so they will do a smaller batch printing and they will charge you the shipping for the size of your order. So you can order a few patterns at a time. And I think for me, this was a really, really good move, because then I started ordering my patterns that I was going to do. I would only order the next few patterns, which I think is a lot better and gives you a higher chance of the amount of patterns that you're actually going to sew. Now that I've moved to Canada and things have shifted a little bit again, I have been doing printing on demand from Correct Textiles here in town, and they are really good. They do a really fast turnaround, and the nice thing about them being in town is I can order a couple of patterns and then go and pick them up. And so I'm saving myself on the shipping, and I'm not ordering more than I need again. So kind of bringing that order down. So it's great having someone local. If you can, I know that's not possible for everybody. Correct Textiles does go within Canada if you need. And I know there's a few other printing services as well. They're just my local, but that's another way to tackle it. So the other thing is I would really do the math on if it even really makes sense to print them. I have kind of come full circle again, and I am back to ordering paper patterns. So these are the last couple I bought. These are both from Rick Rack Textiles. Again, they are here in town. So I would see if you have a local vendor in town, or slash the pattern that you want to use is available in print. For instance, this cashmeret's a really good example. Online, this would cost me $30 for the PDF, and then I'd have to go ahead and get several pages printed. For this whole paper packet, and that includes the instructions and everything, which is really nice, it cost me $32. So actually getting the printed pattern was a lot cheaper for me than ordering the PDF online. So it might be worth really crunching the numbers, really looking at what you're doing. I know I have also looked too, like my local library offers free printing up until $5 for regular printing as well. So, you know, in the future, I might look at just printing blouses off, for instance, at the you know, regular sheet paper size and taping them together and doing all that. So, you know, I would say really look at it, really look at your local area, look at what makes sense. I think we have a tendency to just keep doing what we have been doing. But, you know, I think it's important to look at these things that aren't going to limit your sewing and, you know, aren't going to affect your joy of your sewing, that are just easy, simple switches, easy things to do, easy things to like just think about it for a hot second before you go ahead and buy something. So next up, let's talk fabric. So obviously with the demise of fabric.com, places like Joann's, it is going to be a lot harder to get fabric, and it is more easy to impulse buy, especially if you're buying things like dead stock or clearance fabric, things like that. The impulse to buy that fabric that day is very high, and I think is definitely a struggle, because you never know if you're going to be able to get that fabric again. So it's one of those things I talked about with the patterns, was like, you don't know what fabric you're going to be able to get to go with that pattern in your budget, in your colors, all that, things like that. So one of the ways I limit myself is I do work in a color palette. So as you can probably tell behind me, I have a fairly distinct color palette of colors I wear and like. So I do sort of use the old school method of seasons. I am a spring, which is clear, warm colors. I'm not like super strict about it. I've known it since I was a kid, so I'm not super strict about it. If you want to hear me talk about it some more, I will. I could talk for ages about it, but yeah, I'm not like really strict about it. I don't have my color card in my purse or anything. But I do try and keep it in mind for colors that are going to look good on me. It's going to be something I actually wear. Say, for instance, I really love this scarlety red color and coral, and it looks really good on me, and I get lots of compliments when I wear it. So chances are pretty good that I'm going to use some scarlet red fabric that I have. So just keeping that in mind while you're looking at it, even if it's like, you're like, this is a really good substrate, or it's a really good deal on this particular type of fabric. If it's not in your colors, is it going to be something that you're drawn to? It doesn't necessarily have to be your season. I'm just using it for what I do. But working in a color palette, because it goes with the clothes you already have, it'll go with your wardrobe. You know, you're probably going to look good in it and wear it. All that's really, really good. So that's step one. Is it in colors that I like and I'm going to wear? Check that first. See if that limits you from buying the fabric. My next one is, again, going to seem sort of counterintuitive, but I'm going to say buy enough fabric. One of the things that I am currently struggling with my fabric stash is that I didn't buy enough fabric. And no fabric is more expensive than the fabric that I am going to give away / donate, because I don't actually have enough to do anything functional with, to say a smaller sewist that can actually do something with it. So it's something that I'm trying to be a lot more mindful of. If I can't afford buying a good quantity of it to make the garment that I'm thinking it's going to be, then I should not buy the fabric. So you're sensing a theme in this video. It's basically like how to avoid things that are going to spend money on things that I'm not going to use. Consumption. Limiting my consumption. That's the biggest thing. If you can't buy actually as much fabric as you need. And often the price of buying as much fabric as I need will make me pause for a second on if I actually need that fabric. Really make it sure it's a project that you want to make, that you're gonna make, that you'll buy enough fabric of it. I'm a person that loves dresses, so these last, you can kind of tell how chunky these are. These are enough fabric to make a dress. So really, really looking at that. The other thing I will say is another way to save quite a bit of money, but you do have to be good with yourself about it, is shopping off season. I know myself, I plan a million miles ahead, and so probably by the time I'm gonna even get to that project, it's gonna be the season that it's for. But say for instance, I bought these Rayon linens at the end of last season going into winter. I know I will make them this spring, but you know, we were going out of season into winter. And so by doing it that way, I did actually save a lot of money. Now, the only reason this is going to work is because I actually bought enough fabric to make a dress, and they're in colors that I like. So 2 big caveats there, and I resisted the urge of buying the whole shelf because I bought just the 2 in quantities that made sense. Okay? Okay. The next thing I wanted to talk about is sort of along that same line of having enough and doing enough. So one of the things that with the demise of Joann's in the States, which is going to be a huge issue for a lot of people, but one of the things you do need to think about is all your accessory pieces. So your zippers, your buttons, your tapes, your clip, your pins, all that kind of stuff. And I know for me, I was really bad with that because I lived about a block from a Joann's. So I would just pop out and get what I need, say $20 here, $12 there, so on and so forth to get what I need, the bits and bobs, and really think about how that cost is impacting your project. So that's not an invisible cost. It is something you have to do. This is completely not sponsored, but you have heard me talk a lot lately about Wawak. Wawak, if you're there, please sponsor me. I would really appreciate it. But anyway, so having a look at all those things. So whether that means buying, you know, more generic zippers, or say for instance, I bought covered buttons, and buying covered buttons locally was about $12 for 6 versus I could buy, I don't know, I think it was $25 for $4, $4, something like that. So well more than enough that I needed for the project if I had just thought a little bit more in advance so that I could actually order it. Kind of in a similar vein, your thread. Some companies will be really good about telling you the thread color that matches the fabric that you're buying. Say Blackbird Fabrics, even though they are pricey, they do list like what the Gutermann thread color is so that you could go ahead and order it. You know, I think on Wawak they're only like $1 or so to buy a roll of thread versus I know at my Fabricland they're almost $5 a spool. So thinking about that, maybe keeping some commonly used colors that you have on hand. Like for instance, I bought a bunch of white, and I even bought a giant roll of scarlet actually. As a matter of fact, I bought like a 1,000 meters of scarlet or something in thread. So thinking about that, prepping a little bit in advance about those accessories and trying to get them at a reasonable price, and really looking at your costs. Say for instance, I brought this one up, but my favorite hem tape is actually cheaper to buy on the roll from Wawak than it is for me to spend time making my own hem tape, because I figured out the math of how many meters it would take me to make a similar roll of hem tape. So with all that being said, that's kind of, I would look at those little pieces, look at where you're spending money on that, you know, buying yourself the better pins, all that kind of stuff. All right. So normally this is where most people would say editing Ashley popping in here, but in reality, it's quite a bit later. I edited this a little bit ago, and I realized I forgot quite a few things that I was gonna talk about. Honestly, the day I filmed it, there was a lot of, shall we say, world events going on, and I just was in kind of a wild headspace, but I do think what I talked about was really valuable, so I'm gonna leave it, but that's kind of why the weird energy. But with all that being said, I did miss a couple of things that I do all the time to save money, so I wanted to go through them with you guys. And the first one up that I forgot, again, which I do all the time if you haven't watched any of my other videos, is mockups and toiles. So I kind of use that word interchangeably. I am from Canada, So our unfortunate close proximity to the United States, coupled with being kind of English. I know I've used both kind of interchangeably, even in the same video at times, so I'm really sorry for the confusion. But I think mockups and toiles are a fantastic way to save money. And I think some of you are going to say, but Ashley, I would need additional fabric to make a mockup. And the thing is that you can save a lot of money by not making mistakes in your good fabric. So one of the things that mockups allow me to do is test all my adjustments, make sure they're working correctly, that I like the style on myself, and that it's all gonna work out before I actually move into my good fabric. Sometimes I don't catch everything, but this allows me to catch the majority of things off the bat, especially because I am a person that at least needs one adjustment most of the time. So this allows me to just double check and hedge my bets. I know some people like doing wearable mockups, but what I find about just doing a straightforward mockup is I can actually save myself a lot of time too, in that I'm not worried about it. So I'm not like, I can mark it up, pin it, cut it, do whatever I want to it. I have no stake in the game. I'm not worried about it. I know I've gotten very invested in $5 fabric before, so that's just maybe a personality quirk of me, but if you're anything like that, you know. But it also saves me a lot of time in that I'm not worried about, you know, making all my colors perfect and doing plackets and adding buttons, things like that, that would all kind of add to it. Unless I really want to try like a technique, and doing a mock-up is another good way of just like trying a technique, seeing how you are at it. A lot of times the actual fabric that you're going to be using maybe has a mix of substrates. Maybe it's like a cotton linen blend or something that maybe has a looser weave and is a little bit less forgiving of taking it apart and putting it back together again. So actually, I will show you the mock-up fabric that I have right now because it's ridiculous. But, you know, it was, if we think about the cost of this, so this wild, absolutely wild, sort of hideous fabric was $3 a meter, and then I think it was like an additional 20% off or something like that. So I just bought a bunch of meters of it, and no one's gonna want this, right? And so what this enables me to do is I'm not gonna feel precious about this. I'm gonna mark it up, I'm gonna tear it up, I'm gonna do what I need to do to it. And the thing is, even though it's got this crazy pattern on this side, probably this wouldn't be my first choice of toile fabric. It is 100% cotton, which works great for wovens, but you can see the back, and the back is largely white. So again, allows me to mark up, do all my markups, do all my, you know, make sure I can see what I'm doing. So in that respect, this works just fine. And I can make a bodice for sub a couple dollars then, which again, if I was to make a bodice and have it not work out in my good fabric, you know, that might be $10, $20, $30, $40. And so that's a lot of fabric to waste on something that's not going to work out and I'm not going to wear. So that I think is a fantastic thing. Now, obviously I do this a lot with wovens. I make a lot of wovens. It's my preferred thing to sew and make. If you are making something specialty or something out of knit, you do want to try and toile it in something as close as you can get. But again, you could make it in something ugly if you want. That's a total possibility. You could also do more of a wearable mock-up, which I talked about and I'm like less thrilled with, but a lot of times knits are a lot more forgiving. So just kind of deciding how you are going to make mistakes. I think it's given me a lot of freedom to be able to make mistakes too, which I think has given me a lot more freedom in my sewing practice. And I feel like I've come a lot further along than I would have without doing mock-ups because I'm not afraid of wrecking my camo fabric. And so again, just something I've adopted. I think it's really, really helpful. We have a furry guest. Also, look how big she is now. We've gone from tiny kitten to, well, not a huge cat, but a bigger cat. But yeah, so what was I saying? Something about mock-ups? Say hello. See if I can get full cat purrs on the camera. Hey? Next up, sort of along that same vein, is in fact a hack, or rather a pattern hack. So this is something I honestly did a lot for years. Prior to so many wonderful plus size patterns coming out, but I still do this a lot. And one of the ways I do this is by looking at my pattern and really thinking of all the options I can make, you know, and it might not be the ones you think. Like for me, my Rita dress, that Rita top pattern, I've made like 9 or 10 different versions at this point. I'm wearing one of them right now. So not the pattern you expect, but I love a peasant style. This is something I wear all the time. So I've made knit ones, I've made dresses, I've made gathered dresses with ruffles, I've made full dresses, I've made little peplum tops. You know, thinking about all the variations I could make before I even purchase a pattern is a really good way to save money. But as well, look at the bones of your pattern, see what you have, see what you can do with them. One of the ways I like to do this is to actually just look at the line drawing of the pattern. Try and not look at all the styling and how the styling is done, because I think a lot of times that'll throw you off, especially with some more stylized brands. As much as I love Gertie and her very like retro pinup fantasy cover images, I think that often like pigeonholes them into being one certain way and not thinking about them in a different way. But I think it's really useful to like really just like hone in on those line drawings, look at what they look at, and see if those bones make sense to make something else. Another good example of this is the Rose Claire dress that I made. And I made both the versions that were on the pattern, but I also made like a 1940s top version. So just out of something I saw and something I wanted, where I saw that I could like alter the style lines to do some different hacks. Now when I'm looking at a pattern, I want to be able to at least see like 3 different versions that I could make where someone wouldn't notice like, hey, that's the same top. And, or even if it is, I love it enough to be seen in the same top every day, and that I really enjoy it. Some patterns are better than others for these. Some of them have them built in. Something like the Vista top that I showcased in one of my videos, that one comes with like a sleeve variation pack, so you can make a ton of different versions with different sleeves, and I've made like 3 different versions now. So thinking about the ways you can get extra mileage out of those good patterns that you already have. I talked a little bit about this in my free pattern video, but I actually think you will save more money buying one good pattern, mocking it up really well, and then making like several different versions of that pattern, because I'm not worried about toiling it again, because I already know it fits and I already know I like it. So the chances of success here are also a little bit higher. So there's like a ton of benefits to working with a pattern you already have. So, you know, I think we have a tendency to like collect patterns that look sort of the same, minus like plus or minus a certain element. And so just like really thinking about if you need that new pattern, or if you could hack it out of something you already have, that might be a great way to save money. So the last thing I forgot to talk about, which is also actually something I've talked about before in my free patterns video, is actually utilizing your local library as a way to save money. Or even your local community center. I would highly recommend you looking and seeing what's available in your local community for you to test out, try out, utilize, all that good stuff. I know some communities rent out sewing machines. I know in Austin there was a makerspace that was connected in the library network that would rent embroidery machines and sewing machines and that sort of thing. My local library, I just found out, rents like filming equipment and projectors even. So I've been debating about trying to see if I could rent a projector, if those would actually be applicable projectors for doing projector sewing, to see if that's something I would like to try and learn and utilize. There's also some great meetups. I know here my local community center has a whole bunch of different crafting meetups available with supplies even, which is amazing. My local sewing group met at the library in Austin, so that was all kind of free and part of the library, which was amazing. The other thing, of course, that's amazing about libraries is that you can get free books, and some free books even contain free patterns. So I have talked a lot about these, a couple of Cashmere books. I think the other one's actually out in my cutting area because I was using it ahead of the curve. But yeah, these cashmere books are fantastic, but they are quite spendy, especially here in Canada with exchange. I will of course leave them in the link down below to Amazon because I'm pretty sure that's the cheapest place to get them up here, even though boo Amazon. If you can buy them from a local seller, please do. But yeah, so while these are fantastic value, even as they are, because you get 5 patterns for way less than you would pay for individual cashmere patterns, it is a hefty price. And if you were buying it for a lot of the instruction, you know, and you don't know if you're going to like it or you're going to use it, renting it from your local library is a fantastic way to try it, test it out. And as much as like I would love for you to support Cashmere, if your library doesn't have this book, you can always request it. A lot of libraries take requests, and that means they usually purchase a whole bunch of them. So it is actually a great way to support Cashmere because they do a lot of book purchasing and that sort of thing. But yeah, so it's a great way to see if you like a book, if you click with it. Maybe you haven't sewn Cashmere before, you could take it and try it out. My local library has both, if I didn't already own this book. One of those books that I talked about before is actually this Sewing for Plus Sizes book. And this is a really, really old book. And I rented it from the library about 6 or 7 times before I broke down and bought it because I just think it's so useful. So this gave me a good opportunity to see if the book was applicable to me, see if I found it useful, and I did, and so I bought it. So, you know, that's great to look at too. There are, of course, a plethora of other sewing books available. There's not as many in plus sizes. Again, I've left a few in the link down below, but there are some newer ones that have come out since. I know Gertie's got a new one out. By Hand London's got one out. So there's a few different options there. And of course, just regular old instruction books, like some of the old Singer books and that, those are definitely available at the library and are great just for learning techniques and that sort of thing. And all of that's at your fingertips for free, generally, if you're in the local area. So do check that out. I think it's really important to support your local library and check what resources are available, because if you don't use it, you lose it. So it's really important to keep those resources alive for everyone who needs them. Last but not least is not really about making new projects, but it is about repairing the projects that you've already got. If you've been watching me for a while, you will have seen this in my videos, this kind of progression. But when I first started, well, and even a few years into it, I was really trying to hit that peak of finishing garments. So that meant like French seams and bias binding and other binding and all that good stuff. And have you ever tried to take apart a French seam, put it back together? It is truly terrible, and I would not recommend it or wish it on my worst enemy. So one of the things that doesn't allow me to do is repair my garments easily. So I made a beautiful garment, I wore it for a bit, and then it ended up in the mending pile. And again, no skirt is more expensive than the one I don't wear. So in that, I have been actually thinking about how I construct my garments for repairability, which is kind of a different way of thinking about it. It does end up giving you garments that look more handmade, more old-fashioned in a lot of ways. But what it does allow me to do is repair things without crying, and repair them a lot faster and get a lot more longevity out of my projects. Especially now that I've been actually like wearing my projects consistently for the last few years, I am noticing that I am having to repair things. Say for instance, in my perfect skirt video, I constructed the waistband in such a way where it basically just flips over. And I left the edge as the selvage edge. And that's perfectly acceptable. It's not affecting the strength of my garment, but what it does mean is I only have to undo one line of stitching to go ahead and replace that elastic. So that means I'm not throwing out that entire garment. I'm not making a new garment. I'm just wearing the skirt that I've already got. So other ways I do this is I do leave my seam allowances on things. You've probably seen my preferred method lately has been to serge the edges and then just sew it together, which is great because that gives you that whole seam allowance still to have if you need to let a garment out, take a garment in, all that good stuff. You need to do up a hole or mend something, you can steal a bit from the seam allowance, all that good stuff. The other thing I've been doing is actually using full-blown zippers. One of the things that's notorious for breaking is an invisible zip, and it happens all the time. So I have gone back to doing lap zippers, which I think is really fun, especially for me where I do a lot of vintage inspired garments, but it gives you a lot more strength. It gives you a lot more durability. So thinking about ways that you can repair things, make them more durable, make them stand up to washing and wearing, all that's really important once your garment leaves your sewing table, because you've already sunk the investment, right? You've already bought the pattern, you've already bought the fabric, you've already bought the accessories, you've made the thing up. So being able to repair it and fix it is really important if your goal is garments. So like I say, I don't know if that belongs in here, but I'm just going to mention it because it's been something I've been thinking a lot about. So hopefully this was helpful for you guys. I know it was probably a little bit of a different video than what you were expecting. I've seen other people make this video and I feel like this is kind of a different take to a certain extent, but I'm hoping some of these strategies were really helpful for you guys. Again, the overarching thing is like, don't buy things you don't need or not going to use, because that's going to have the least impact on your sewing and the wonderful garments that you're going to make. And, you know, I think it's important to talk about because all we can do is the things that we have control over, which in my case is my sewing room. So I know people are having a time. It's been a rough couple of weeks when I'm filming this, especially for us Canadians, but doing things with my hands, working on my sewing has really been making me feel a lot better. And so I feel like it's really important to talk about it in a way that, you know, we just do what we can do the best we can, and we're gonna keep calm and carry on. So I hope you guys are getting a lot of wonderful, restful, relaxing, positive sewing time in, or whatever makes you feel good. And I will see you on the next one. Bye guys.